Hello folks, we're now several weeks into the War Within, and with all that new content now out there and bedding in, I thought it's a great time to take a look at how the new expansion has landed and where it goes from here. World of Warcraft has traditionally been gameplay first. What this has meant is that the game was never really built for story delivery, and for the longest time Blizzard have had to rely on books and other external media to flesh out what is possibly one of the deepest and most interesting video game story worlds. In more recent years, the relative success of Final Fantasy XIV has brought the idea of an MMO having a rich in-game story to the fore, and this has sparked greater interest in the story for many World of Warcraft players, and I suspect that this has gotten the WoW dev team's attention and led to a much greater focus on the in-game story, with so far some mixed results. So how did the story of the War Within stack up? Learning from the lessons of recent expansions, the team clearly decided to plump for a primary villain who was already not just well known to the player base but also very popular in Xal'atath, and it turns out that decision may have been spectacularly successful. While I'm personally not a fan of the WoW dev team's tendency to destroy major locations in-game, Xal'atath's first big appearance was excellent, driven by an outstanding vocal performance by Babylon 5's Claudia Christensen. She tore up the scenery with malicious glee, perfectly capturing the attitude and spite of every Shadow Priest and Legion's favourite weapon. This then led us into a zone storyline in the Isle of Dorn that felt very well paced and exciting. Things though really did start to get going in the following zones. The climax of the Ringing Deep with Azeroth's intercession in the fate of both the Earthen and Magni Bronzebeard actually managed to make me tear up not once but twice. In Haliful, we get a cool creepy vibe with a narrative that tells us that there really are things in the dark to be afraid of, along with a great depiction of Anduin's internal struggles and multiple standout new characters including General Steelstrike and of course Faerun Lothar. This all led to a climax in Azj-Kahet, where the introduction of creepy new allies led us towards a climactic encounter between Illyria and Xal'atath, which again really hit the spot for me. Going on to the max level storylines, and the penny seems to have finally dropped within the WoW dev team that splitting the story into tiny morsels spread over 6 or more weeks just completely spoils the pacing. Instead, this time the story was spread over just 3 weeks, all of which were much larger and well-structured episodes, which led us up to another series of climactic and emotionally impactful cinematics, along with the revelation that we were the ones that were being manipulated by Xal'atath into being the enemy of the Nerubians. The crowning glory of in-game storytelling in World of Warcraft has for many years been the Legion 7.0 Suramar storyline, which for me was one of the few times that I'd really gotten invested in a zone story, and one of the very few instances where the in-game experience actually managed to deliver a series of major emotional hits. Whereas that was a single zone story amidst an overall leveling experience that was otherwise honestly pretty average. The War Within's experience effortlessly met the heights of Suramar, but managed to maintain that over multiple zones, delivering a level of consistently good storytelling that's frankly unprecedented in World of Warcraft. Nothing is perfect, of course, and there has been feedback that the main campaign was overly short, and I do think that most of the zones had some side storylines that should probably have been included in the main campaign. And the final episode of the campaign, where we take Ansarek down in the raid, kinda feels a little bit like an aftershock, but these really aren't enough to detract from the many successes. Moving on to the open world max level gameplay, and it very much feels to me like the WoW dev team have taken all of the lessons and feedback from Dragonflight on board and have sought to build on those experiences, and the results have been, for me, kinda mixed. As someone who was not a fan of the way that the scheduled open world events of Dragonflight felt very much like the game was telling me when and when not to play, seeing that most of the new events are ones that you can dip into at any time, with only one single scheduled event, is something that I definitely approve of. That said, those events are a bit of a mixed bag. The Theatre Troupe event tries to merge together the Tusker Soup event with Time Rifts, but it really doesn't seem to land well. I can't quite put my finger on why that is, but one big possibility is the severe in-game performance issues that occur whenever I try to do it. It's very hard to really assess gameplay when you're fighting freezes and lags, and I'm genuinely surprised these issues remain unresolved so many weeks into the expansion. As for the other events, I do see what they wanted to achieve with Awakening the Machine, but honestly, once you've done that event once, in my view, it lacks repeatability, and much the same applies to the World Soul Memories event. This leaves Spreading the Light event in Halifall to do much of the heavy lifting, and that is something it manages to do really well. I also very much wanted to include the new Merodar Fishing Derby in this category, but a frankly incomprehensible decision by the developers to nerf the rewards from the event's weekly quest just recently has for me completely ruined the event. Being asked to spend 8 hours in 8 different alts to get similar rewards to having spent 1 hour in my main has completely put me off the event. I also have some mixed feelings about the world quest. Following the pattern of Dragonflight and even 9.2 in Shadowlands, there is genuine innovation in the world quest, but unlike those previous examples where the pool of available quests often felt quite shallow with the same quests coming around far too often, this time around the pool does at least feel like it's a little bit deeper. But if you do world quests regularly, you very quickly find that we're getting 1 new world quest per zone per day, or in the case of Ashkahet, 4 new world quests every 3 days, compared with Legion and BFA, where whenever you logged in, the world always seemed to be filled with world quests. This, in my view, can create a bit of an impression of there not being much to do in the open world. There are also twice weekly special assignment world quests. At first glance, these evoke memories of the old emissary system, but for folks who do world quests regularly, they create a situation where you often cannot even unlock them in the same day because, well, there's not enough world quests to do. Ashkahet also has a brand new system called Rumours and Treasures, which involves an additional set of daily quests which only appear when you get close to them or you buy some special maps to reveal them. This is a cool new mechanic, which is sadly let down by poor rewards. The lack of any reputation and very sparse dribbles of currency make them feel very unrewarding to do once the novelty wears off, and this is a great shame as the premise and vibe of these quests is excellent. The back of the box feature for the War Within this time around has been delves. These are billed as mini dungeons designed for solo or small group play. Now, Blizzard have made several attempts to cater to this particular game niche in the past, with Island Expeditions, Warfronts, Torghast, and many of these attempts fell a bit flat, often due to frankly botched reward designs. With Delves, Blizzard have clearly tried to avoid these mistakes, using a reward system that is modelled on the highly successful Mythic Plus system, combined with varied gameplay design that builds on the long successful dungeon formula. Delves have very little in common with those predecessors, and that's a very good thing. With Delves, Blizzard have clearly tried to avoid those mistakes, using a reward system that is modelled on the highly successful Mythic Plus system, combined with varied gameplay design that builds on the long successful formula of dungeons. Delves have very little in common with those predecessors, and that's a very good thing. Probably for the first time ever, it really feels like the game has a genuinely credible progression system for players who don't want to focus on the traditional big three, combined with a reward system that has the potential to be the best offering that solo and casual players have experienced since Battle for Azeroth. A new system like this was always going to bring some challenges for the developers. Keen to ensure the success of the feature, the developers did move with commendable speed to try and resolve the issues as they came up, but a combination of rushed overreaction changes did lead to a few days of painful thrash for players. There's no doubt that the WoW dev team does need to learn some lessons from this, but in the end, they have managed to land Delves in a pretty decent place for players, albeit I do suspect it's not the place the designers had already intended. As of today, Delves seem to be very popular with players, and deservedly so. In Dragonflight, the dungeons were, in my view, overly complex and punishing for healers, which created a situation where in most seasons, the older dungeons that supplemented the pool often turned out to be most popular. For the War Within, the team does seem to have learned the necessary lessons. The dungeons dungeons feel to be much more focused on the basics of providing a satisfying experience. Initially, the Dawnbreaker dungeon did appear to be a bit of an outlier, but thanks to some new tuning changes, it now has the potential to be one of the favourites. That is, if the developers can get some of the more serious game-breaking bugs in that dungeon resolved. Why they didn't pull it from the first season to buy them a bit more time to fix it up is really beyond me. With Necrotic Wake and Siege of Borealis, two of my least favourite dungeons from the past in the Season 1 pool, I will admit I was very apprehensive approaching the Mythic Plus season. However, thanks to a redesign of the affix system and some tuning changes to the dungeons, overall my first week experience has been quite positive. That said, Siege of Borealis is still up there as being the turkey of this season. There has been some community discourse around toxicity, and I do have concerns that the new +7 affix, which increases the penalty for deaths, will be a major driver of that toxicity, especially the behaviour of quitting otherwise viable keys. But I also suspect that part of the narrative around toxicity is due to us having to adjust to the changes to the Mythic Plus scaling, with a +2 now being the equivalent of a +12 under the old system. I suspect that for a lot of players, they are pushing into a level of difficulty that they have not in the past, and if this is perhaps leading to them not meeting their own expectations in terms of progress. This push is partly due to changes to the rewards. For Dragonflight Season 4, we were promised that the rewards would match the new difficulty curve, but for the War Within, this has been adjusted, asking us to push higher up than in the past to get the same rewards, and also relegating Mythic Zero rewards to a level where they fail to compete with Delves, and even to a degree with open world content. These changes to Mythic Zero dungeon rewards is another strange decision by the developers, as one of the arguments for changing up the scaling was that Mythic Zero dungeons tended to become irrelevant after the initial expansion pre-season period. And yet my experience of this pre-season start was that the only reason to do a Mythic Zero was to practice the dungeon. While it's too late for this season, I do think that Blizzard really needs to take a hard look at the dungeon rewards for future seasons and really question if they're meeting their stated goals. For the last expansion and a half, there's definitely been a vibe that raids might be in a bit of a very long and slow decline. There's still plenty of people raiding, but the difficulty gap between heroic and mythic raid, especially in the organizational side, and the amount of effort that mythic raiding requires, is actively deterring a lot of players from making the jump from heroic to mythic. For this season, Blizzard appear to be increasing the difficulty and rewards of the last two bosses of heroic to, I suspect, encourage more of an overlap between the two modes, and perhaps to try to return to the days where heroic raid teams might have aimed to have also cleared the first few bosses in mythic. While there is merit to that idea, mythic raiding's fixed 20-man size and all that comes with it, such as the need to bench players to make sure that you've a pool big enough to handle no-shows, in a world where the typical heroic raid team is in the 20 to 16-man range, remains a formidable barrier far greater than any gameplay mechanics, and I am not confident the devs' aims are going to succeed. For me, raiding needs a much deeper revamp, similar to the shake-ups that Mythic Plus saw in both the Dragonflight and War Within Season 4s. That all said, the raid bosses are very good, with interesting and challenging mechanics, and I've been having a blast so far. The final aspect of gameplay has been the Warbands, billed as account-wide everything. Blizzard have in many ways delivered. While the standout for me has been the Warband Bank and the ability to learn transmog and reputation account-wide, this feature has come with a raft of other smaller tweaks which deliver major quality of life improvements. There are a few odd gaps, such as raid skips not being account-wide or the lack of Warband Bank repairs, and I do hope that Blizzard have plans to continue to iterate and expand in this feature, ideally driven by player feedback. Now, nothing is perfect, and in a review like this, there are always going to be criticisms, and the internet being what it is, there is a risk that those criticisms will drown out the positives. So I want to be very clear about this. The War Within does have a few gaps and flaws, but there are also very many positives. My concerns that the underground nature of the zones might not land well with players has been completely dispelled. The combination of some of the best lighting I've ever seen in game, environmental design, and lots of little quality of life tweaks like shortcuts between the zones has allowed the team to successfully navigate a very difficult problem and create an overall package that not only avoids the mistakes of the past, but is creating a place that's genuinely a great place to spend time. Whatever your choices of playstyle, the gameplay loops are consistently well designed to enable us to dip in without that feeling from past expansions of being forced to play. Little things like weekly wrapper quests that allow us a choice of what to focus on, or major rewards dropping from a variety of different activities, all add up to create a feeling of genuine choice and player agency that is just perfect for an MMO of the size and scale of World of Warcraft. That feeling of choice also provides another massive benefit for players and devs alike. If there's something in the game that really doesn't land, it's very easy to just ignore it and focus on the things that you enjoy. And that's the true strength of the War Within's design. That feeling of an expansive world with the freedom to choose your preferred path reminds me very much of the old World of Warcraft. The difference though is that this choice now has a lot more depth. In the old days of World of Warcraft, once you hit max level, for many players it was raid or die. Sure, there was other stuff to do, but outside of raiding, rewards were sparse and non-raiders quickly fell behind. In contrast, today, most of your choices will lead you down a path of satisfying character progression. It's obviously far too early to compare the War Within with the other expansions, but this is without a doubt the strongest start to a new World of Warcraft expansion since at least Legion, and is placing World of Warcraft in a very strong position upon which to build. All the dev team needs to do now is to maintain momentum and gameplay quality into the expansion's patches. During BlizzCon, I could not help but think that the War Within sounded like the weakest of the 3 entries in the World Soul Saga, which creates the enticing possibility that it can only get better from here. Time will tell, of course, but if you're wondering if it's worth trying WoW for the first time or returning to WoW, my answer is an unqualified yes. This is probably the best time to return in the last 5 years or so, and if you are a returning player or maybe a classic fan looking to make the switch, I do have one piece of advice for you. Put aside your preconceptions about how the game used to be and treat it like a fresh game. Both the game and the player pace have moved on a lot, and you'll find that you will enjoy it a lot more if you don't try to force an old school like experience onto the game. But what about all of you? Are you enjoying the War Within? Or is it just not for you? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you have any questions about the game, also do feel free to ask. If you found this review useful or interesting, then please let me and the YouTube algorithm know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to know when more of my videos are going live, or you just want to support the channel, then do make sure to hit that subscribe button. Subscribing is by far the best way to support my channel. I'll be back soon with lots more news updates, reviews, opinions and guides. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.